Okay then, it's an important class. We're going to talk about 3 kinds of advantages, disadvantages prompts. For these ones, you have to read the prompt really, really carefully because the requirements for these are different and the optimum way to approach these is also different. So the 3 prompts, we're going to call them 3A, which is simply to discuss the advantages and disadvantages. 3B, do the advantages outweigh the disadvantages? And 3C, discuss the advantages and disadvantages and give your opinion. So the first one, if you get discuss the advantages and disadvantages, for this type of prompt, do not give your opinion. You're only being asked to summarize the pros and the cons and nothing else. So there's 2 things you need to do. You need to describe the advantages in one body paragraph, and you need to describe the disadvantages in a second body paragraph. The second one you can get, do the advantages outweigh the disadvantages? You only need to do one thing. Explain how the advantages of one side exceed those of the other side, and give 2 reasons. This is very similar to agree, disagree. You do not need to talk about both sides. You can acknowledge one side, but that's it. And for the third type, discuss the advantages and disadvantages and give your opinion. There's 3 things you have to do. You have to describe the advantages, describe the disadvantages, and choose a side. Explain which side makes more sense and why. So when it comes to discuss the advantages and disadvantages, it's a very straightforward format. So again, the introduction, we describe our context, we just paraphrase the question prompt, and we just describe one major advantage and one major disadvantage. Okay, one body paragraph for each, and then simply summarize both. Do not give your opinion for this one. Okay, this is the same structure that we've been working with. The only point of difference is that you're not giving your opinion. We don't want to say, I think. We don't want to say, I believe. At the end, resist the temptation to say which side makes more sense. There's no need to do that. It's actually a very easy prompt type. Here's some sample thesis statements that you can use. You can simply say the major advantage of X is this. Conversely, the major disadvantage is Y. Or a complex sentence, the major advantage of X is this, while the major disadvantage is that. The major advantage of X is this, semicolon, on the other hand, comma, the major disadvantage is da-da-da. Or on the one hand, some people prefer X because of this, others prefer Y because of that. Okay, this brings us to the next one. 3B, do the advantages outweigh the disadvantages? So again, this is very much like an agree, disagree prompt. Resist the temptation to talk about both sides. You don't need to. Okay, it's not in the question. There's no requirement to talk about both sides. Okay. Now, there's 2 ways to approach this. In this question, for example, it says, in many countries, children are engaged in some kind of paid work. Some people regard this as completely wrong, while others consider it as valuable work experience, important for learning and taking responsibility. Do the advantages outweigh the disadvantages? So there's 2 ways that you could approach this. One would be to talk about the advantages of paid work for kids, one advantage, and then the second advantage. Another way to approach this could be to talk about the advantage of part-time work for kids as your first reason. And the second reason could be the disadvantage of not working. So it's kind It's kind of the same thing, but with a twist. So the advantage of one side and the disadvantage of the other side is the same thing as giving two reasons in favor of one side. Okay, and you've got a representation here. So don't pick both, just do one. So you could do, so body paragraph 1 is the advantage number 1, the first advantage rather of side number 1. And then body paragraph 2 could be advantage number 2 of side number 1. Or it could be the disadvantage of side number 2. Okay, so don't do a 5-paragraph essay and do all this stuff. Just choose one or the other. It doesn't really matter which one you choose. Whichever one is just more appropriate for the given prompt. Here's some thesis templates for style 3B, and these are the same as the ones for 3C. They both work perfectly well, so you only need to memorize one type. In my opinion, although X has its advantages, the benefits of Y are far more substantial. So notice here, we're only very briefly mentioning one side. And that's as far as we need to go. So this is like a quick and dirty thesis that you can use for your introduction. But for the full thesis, again, we'll just briefly acknowledge the other side, but we don't need to develop it. In summary, although X is beneficial for some purpose, the advantages of Y are far more substantial because of these two reasons. And then the final type, discuss the advantages and give your opinion. You don't need to use 3 body paragraphs for this. The side that you agree with and your opinion should be the same paragraph. The easiest way to approach this is to start body paragraph 1 by talking about the side that you disagree with. The structure is easy. Describe one side and start by saying that this is what some people believe. Some people believe da 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 da. And then spend that paragraph talking about why some people believe that. For your next body paragraph, describe the other side and simply state in your topic sentence that you agree with this side. And that's all you need to do. Okay, so what does that look like? Okay. Here, describe the obvious advantages of the side that you disagree with. And again, the structure is still the same. Give your reason, evidence, example, significance. But then for the second body paragraph, the side that you agree with, describe the obvious disadvantages as an example and state that you agree with this side. Okay. Again, give reasons, an example, evidence, and explain why the disadvantages outweigh the advantages. Okay, so these are the same thesis templates as we saw for type 3B. Okay. Just mention, although X has its advantages, the benefits of Y are far more substantial. So this would be like your quick and dirty thesis for the introduction, but for the full thesis and the conclusion, you can say in summary, although X is beneficial for, and just summarize the reason from your first body paragraph, the advantages of Y are far more substantial because of A, if you have a second reason, also B. Any questions?
John, this is for Unit 3, right?
Correct.
Okay.
So when you look at those prompts, you have to read them very carefully to be certain that you are responding in the appropriate way based on which advantages, disadvantages prompt it is. People mess this up all the time, and everyone's accustomed to giving their opinion, writing arguments, so people tend to give their opinion for all of them, and you can lose marks because it's not asked for. It's considered off topic.
So can we do like in the form type where advantages outweigh the disadvantages? So it's mean we have to state advantages first and then disadvantages, and then we have to tell that disadvantages are more than advantages.
No, that's too complicated.
Mm-hmm.
You combine the second body paragraph with your opinion. So this is only for the third type, where you have to talk about both sides, the advantages and disadvantages.
I'm just talking about the when it's come advantages overweigh the disadvantages. This condition, we have to discuss about the disadvantages or advantages or
You
both.
pick one side only.
Okay. Okay.
Only pick one side. This is not a balanced essay because they're asking you, do the advantages outweigh the disadvantages? The answer is either yes or no. Okay, so if the advantages outweigh the disadvantages, then you're giving two reasons why that's true. If you think the disadvantages outweigh the advantages, again, two reasons why the disadvantages exceed the advantages.
Okay.
Okay. Do not write a balanced essay because you're going to end up with one of these.
No, I was just talking about like once we have to give the disadvantages, then advantages, and then we will explain why.
Yeah, so you don't need to do that for 3B.
Okay.
Only one side. For
Like agree and
3C,
disagree. Like agree and disagree then.
Mhm.
Okay.
Sorry, I missed the last thing you said.
You said like agree and disagree essay. We can do it like that.
Yeah, it's the same. For agree, disagree, best practice is just to give two reasons for one side. Don't try and do a balanced essay about I agree for this reason, I also disagree for that reason. Don't do that on IELTS. At university, college, no problem. Here, don't do it.
Okay.
Mr. Yan, for 3C, and why we should give disadvantages in our agree side, like here body paragraph 2. Side you agree with,
Oh,
describe the disadvantages. Why I don't write the advantages?
this is just an example.
Okay.
You might think the advantages exceed the disadvantages, or you might think the disadvantages exceed the advantages. It doesn't matter which one you pick.
Okay.
This is just, in this particular example, what you want to do is start with the side you disagree with, regardless of whether that's advantages or disadvantages. So in this particular example, let's say we're talking about part-time jobs for kids. I don't think they're a good idea. Let's say I think they're a bad idea. I want my kids to focus on school. So this is the side I disagree with, but I'm going to talk about the advantages of part-time jobs for kids, what most people think. I'm going to talk about how it teaches kids responsibility, how it teaches them about the real world, how to balance a checkbook, for example. But then I'm going to say the disadvantages of jobs for kids exceed the advantages because when they're young, they need to focus on studying. What they learn from working at Tim Hortons or a grocery store isn't worth learning. It doesn't transfer to anything really. They're better off getting a really low allowance from their parents and focusing on their schoolwork. Right? I would say, so the disadvantages of part-time work, the fact that it detracts from their schoolwork, the fact that it takes away study time is the biggest disadvantage of part-time jobs for kids, and it far exceeds the advantages.